Hi, I'm Doug. I wrote The Guardsman under the pen name of R.G. Taark. Today we are on episode 37. This is chapters 86 and 87. We are on book 3, that's this one here. So, please sit back, relax, and enjoy, and when you get a chance, hit that like, subscribe button. Love to talk to you in the comments. Please enjoy.
The Guardsman, Book 3, Wrath and Retribution, Episode 37, Chapters 86 through 87. Chapter 86. Bryce checked his comm as it chirped once at him from his pocket. He kept his heavy assault gauss across his chest and dipped his hand into his left upper thigh pocket to check the annoyance. Outside of Persephone's office, she worked inside alone during the normal duty day. He only had to watch the one avenue of approach from the rest of the secured intelligence headquarters and track the ranking officers and their certified subordinates this deep in the complex. They were all becoming familiar to the point where he could tell who was who by how they walked from behind or past him from the side. His minuscule movements to check the comm outside his charge's office were unnoticed in the normal office routine. He pressed his thumb to the biometric security device that opened his messages. It was an irritating time waste of an option that he'd had to activate on his device once he'd started doing the High Commander's skullduggery. The message was from a number he recognized as one of Vlad's drop comms, designed to be used once by Vlad and then destroyed. The message said simply, "Your delivery is still in progress. Guaranteed the same level of customer service as demanded by our customer, with our efforts at customer service matching our contracting customers." That cryptic, seemingly poorly auto-generated customer service message could have come from any of nearly a billion customer service-oriented product delivery services in the city. It could be related to anything from food and sundry delivery services to electronics and industrial equipment. Any one of them could have a dodgy and poorly performing messaging algorithm attached to their automated comm. He realized too late that just the fact that a guardsman was receiving such innocuous messages from a delivery service on his duty comm could potentially raise eyebrows. He had already finished contracting with Vlad and was well on his way back to civilization by the time that little misstep had dawned on him. In addition to his annoyance at his continued amateur mistakes in the spy game, he was also annoyed with the content of the message. Vlad was telling him that he had no idea where Casimir was hiding. They had not been able to locate him, even though Vlad was putting every effort he could honorably apply to the search to comply with the High Commander's contract. He cleared the message from the screen and relocked the comm. He'd have to report the message to the High Commander, and that was going to be annoying. He didn't like being the bearer of bad news, even if Samson was as aware of the long-shot nature of their efforts. Major McKinley was due back any minute. He would just wait until they swapped off again, and he'd report to the High Commander, instead of cleaning his weapon as he'd intended during the coming break. Once relieved, he stepped inside and reported his errand, running over to the High Commander's office to Lady Persephone, asking if she had anything she needed to be taken over there. Persephone smiled politely at the offer, thanked him, said no, and sent him on his way. Once the door closed firmly behind Bryce, Persephone pointed at the door he'd just left and poked the air with every syllable. "I'm going to find out what that secret is that you two troublemakers are trying to keep from me. One of you two boys is going to spill the beans, I promise." Persephone dropped both hands onto the empty and open folder that lay with its contents strewn about in a four-pile halo around the cascading piles of paperwork. On the open folder, she'd drawn a simple timeline and segmented it by months and years. Then she plugged in the largest and most egregious events that had affected her family over the last several decades. She had everyone on that timeline now. The dates started 20 years before her birth and worked all the way across the page to the current date on the far right. What she saw irritated her immensely. Every 2 years, like clockwork, family members had died for the better part of a decade. The only exception was Casimir's younger sister, who was killed slightly off-cycle and with no discernible link to any conspiracy. With both of her middle brothers dying the same day, Persephone had to wonder if that had not altered people's planning timeline for her. The frustratingly damning piece that she had added to this version of the timeline was an exact, to the week, color-coded location diagram of Casimir's entire professional and military career that tracked every assignment, interstellar jump, combat deployment, to which worlds, and for how long. Each hard copy file that she had arrayed around the open folder represented one fatal incident and all the pertinent information she could pull together on that event. She had a burning itch that told her there was much more to this than she was seeing yet. Without yet having access to Casimir's personal files, that was just a feeling. She strongly suspected all the missing pieces hid there, behind his encryption protocols, just waiting for her. She rank ordered all of her siblings and cousins based on their dates of death according to the timeline. First was Casimir's younger sister Phona. Persephone could find no viable ties to Casimir with her death. He had been nowhere near her when her ship was ambushed and destroyed. Second was her oldest brother Philip Roman II when she was only 6. He was killed by some sort of loitering missile above the traffic patterns outside the citadel. Third was her older sister Rhee when she was 8. There was a modest break, and then 2 of her brothers were killed the same day in the same solar system when she was 12. Fourth, Alcander was killed on the ground when an emergency beacon was tripped. Fifth, Thanos was killed after a skillful and daringly successful attack by his Lancer squadron on an enemy flotilla before a randomly arriving armed supply convoy arrived above him in lethal firing positions. Sixth was Chiron, Casimir's younger brother, killed in the same attack that landed Samson on her protection detail all those years ago when she was 14. Persephone could find no relationship between Casimir and her aunts Alala and Katharina when they were killed. However, there was a stinking thread that placed Casimir in the solar systems where and when Rhee, Alcander, Thanos, and finally Chiron had been killed. That connection was too heavy to ignore. He was on a staff assignment in the Ground Forces Corporation headquarters in this very city when Rhee had been killed shopping with her friends. He was in the main body of the fleet when Alcander and Thanos had been killed. And lastly, Samson had on several occasions grumbled about the irritating visit by Casimir to Chiron's command post before it had been hit, and how he'd kept up his tirade via comms long after he'd left. Samson had also mentioned how there'd been a bothersome discrepancy between what Casimir had told his younger brother to do in the field and what he'd later told his father Thanadios about Chiron's death, the day she'd met Samson for the first time. His presence in the city for Rhee means nothing if it were not for the chain of events following, and the death of her older brother 2 years before. Casimir was nowhere around for Philip Ei's death, though, and that put a kink in her hypothesis. Alcander, by all accounts, had an excellent reconnaissance team that persistently scored the highest marks for competence and equipment maintenance. They had typical crazy recon team troubles in garrison, but those were all little things like fights and wild behavior, but nothing debilitating to a unit. The nearly statistical impossibility that some piece of rescue gear suddenly sends a broad-spectrum test, while Casimir is in the system and Alcander's team is deep behind the lines in enemy territory, created a coincidence that was hard for her to believe. That coincidence became even more improbable after Rhee and what Samson saw with Chiron. Thanos was a different story because they were in a random running space battle with an enemy flotilla. Their mission was to keep that flotilla from closing with and destroying the debarking troop transports where Casimir was landing. The odds of randomly coordinating a foreign power's naval escorted supply convoy entry into a system after a 15-day jump to land on top of Thanos would have required a ridiculous amount of impossible planning, foresight, and omniscient fortune-telling coordination that no sane person could ever believe was possible. Thanos' death was just dumb luck. It had to be. But suddenly, with Philip Roman II, Ree, Alcander, and Thanos all being killed in action or assassinated publicly and brutally, there had to have been questions and additional security installed. Casimir would have been forced to back off her, because the phenomenal streak of bad luck would inevitably point to someone. So naturally he and his father must have decided to shelve their plans for a while. Persephone shook her head as she realized the extent of Casimir's duplicitous dealings. Casimir had gone so far as to betray his own father by setting up his own younger brother Chiron to die along with Samson and the rest of that headquarters unit. She always remembered her uncle Thanatios being so proud of his youngest son Chiron. Given what she now knew about Casimir's narcissistic personality, it fits that he could not allow someone to rival his light in the father's eyes as co-conspirator for the mantle of House Kroinos' leadership. For Casimir, the removal of Chiron also meant that Thanatios could not pass over, disinherit, or even kill Casimir in favor of his intelligent, capable, and talented younger brother. Persephone pinched her eyes and spoke to her scattered and unresponsive papers. Casimir, you bastard. You worked with your father. You both got your hands dirty. And then when you two were getting ready to make your move on me, you decided to change the plans. You must have suspected something of your father and decided to take your younger brother out of the equation first, so you couldn't be replaced. Your father might have suspected that he'd created a rabid dog in you and been planning on putting you down in favor of your younger brother, who would have had his hands clean from the start. You couldn't allow yourself to be used as Thaniato's disposable tool. You would have had to have been the only tool available to your father when he made his final play for control of the family. No matter. You removed the potential rival while obscuring yourself and your father. Now you two have lost a son and brother respectively, so Daddy stopped looking from our branch of the tree diminishing to your side not diminishing, wondering the cause. With your sister and brother dead, Daddy had to start looking elsewhere. It became prudent for him too, because it appeared our family as a whole was under attack. He had to look for multiple outside attackers once your line had suffered a little decimation. You then spared me, but you personally moved on your own brother, figuring you'd clean me up later. In a single stroke, you threw the hounds off the scent, removed a rival, and then all you had to do after killing me was wait patiently for your father to pass on naturally. Or you could have sped him along and just waited for my parents to pass, leaving yourself as heir for no better reason than lack of options. She tossed her bound file sections back into her folder in their rote chronological order and flipped the folder closed. Persephone leaned far back into her chair and pressed her knuckles into her eyes. Damn, I need a look into your computer, you bastard. Where have you hidden your secrets? How do I get into them? Nothing I have proves anything, just that you were in the solar system when these things happened. Help me to understand you better, cousin. When I understand you, I can hunt you better. When I can hunt you better, I can drag you back here kicking and screaming. Once I have you, I'll turn the interrogation teams loose in your brain, suck you dry, and I can finally kill you slowly like the vermin you are. Chapter 87. Christos drummed his gloved fingers on the simple wooden table he sat behind, waiting for higher security minions to finish their prompt security sweep around the simple residential room that Casimir's team maintained as a safe house. His guests had already corrected their security minions, forcing them to leave their anonymous client alone to protect his substantial investments and identity. The brothers in their Earth-imported custom-tailored ancient name brand silk wool three-piece suits were the epitome of Earth fashion. They both had the money to indulge in fine fashion, not to mention the social comedy of their sexually repressed, outwardly aggressive, inwardly submissive investment clients, and how they liked to be dominated, humiliated, and impressed by the brothers' superior fashion sense. That fashion-related humiliation drove their customers' need for money and success like the need to reproduce in rats and other lower life forms. It was such a farcical comedy to watch, as he sat in his simple overcoat hood up, black leather gloves, and concealing metal mask. It was a laughable irony to consider, but he remained totally silent. He remained totally silent as the two personal security agents in their sharp blue uniforms with their corporate badges, their openly carried personal weapons, and high-tech snooping gear swept right past the passive listening device Casimir's own team had placed in the ceiling. It was hidden just beyond the boundary of the unused kitchenette, at the cusp of the apartment's transition to the living area. Casimir liked the idea of utilizing a room, 2 rooms actually, in the bottom 10% of one of his dear Aunt Celine's residential holdings. It practically tickled him to sit here and plot the earliest stages of her downfall, along with the rest of her repugnant and pusillanimous line. The thought amused him. The few hundred credits a month for the rooms in this droll building hundreds of kilometers to the northwest of Center City, about a third of the distance to the city's outskirts, was not even an amount of credits he ever thought to miss. He wanted to chuckle again that some of the world's more pathetic life forms actually considered these types of lodgings as adequate. Those weaklings spent their whole lives slaving away for their betters only to return to people warehouses like this after their workdays. And while they slaved for next to nothing, they spent most of that nothing just trying to afford this windowless cube. The rental security blithered their incorrect assumption that the room was clear of listening devices to their paymasters. They finally allowed the brothers to step deeper into the room and approach the table. Casimir felt a spike of irritation as he glared, unseen, at Stuart from behind his mask. Had the redhead bitch died properly, her shares would have defaulted in whole to the idiot brothers, and they could have easily passed them into Casimir's rightful hands. Instead, that piece of worthless female meat remained alive, and he had to adjust the plans. Foster had reported earlier that morning that one of his passive queries had reported that the little bitch wife of his had not in fact been turned out. Their gambit to drive her back into his possession had been upended by the usurpers, and she was adopted into the family of all things. She was now occupying his, thankfully departed, father's seat as head of the hegemony holding corporation's personnel division. She should have been turned out, and with his unjust status, his whore should have carried his shares out and back to him. That irksome little detail should have folded her smoothly into his possession, but instead, the two brothers must have screwed it up somehow. On top of that, there were the aesthetic issues. Stuart looked entirely too much like the traitorous little wretch of a woman, with his pale porcelain skin and perfectly coiffed red hair. Lennox pissed him off less. He looked more like their father than the brothers' mother. When Casimir had his rightful place back, that little whore would pay for her treachery and betrayal. She stole from him. He would catch up with her eventually. She was just another loose end that needed to be accounted for and settled like so many other reprehensible insults lately. The brothers both pulled out one of the 2 simple wooden chairs across from him at the table. While they scraped across the cheap carpet weave, Casimir nodded to the security personnel. With several flicks of his right index finger at the door, he finally drew both brothers' attention. It took forever before the brainless brothers turned and recognized he was not going to speak in front of hired guns. Lennox ordered, "Both of you wait outside." The senior of the two spoke clearly and levelly, "Sir." While the room is clear, we are charged with your safety and security. Are you sure you want us outside where it will take longer to respond to any incident? Casimir recognized the tone from his own loyal soldiers and remained silent as the financiers corrected their man. Yes, 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 wait by the door. The walls in these slums are paper thin. You'll hear any ruckus in here. Casimir almost chuckled at the spoken idiocy. Both security men probably lived in a unit just like this. Given their avaricious nature, the brothers could have afforded guardsmen, but refused because they wanted to hoard the profits for themselves. And then Lennox had called his hired guns, likely home a slum, the fool. A useful fool, but a fool nonetheless. Lennox continued as if he had not heard a word. You will be able to hear any commotion perfectly clearly. This is a confidential and anonymous, but extremely well-paying client who wishes to remain anonymous and not discuss business in front of extra ears. The security both saluted their crisp military-style salutes and turned to leave silently. It amused Casimir to think about Morno and Meade across the hall, standing still as stones behind their own closed door, and that slum's paper-thin walls staring steadily through the thermal scopes of their high-powered Gauss. The weapons were stabilized on their telescoping support legs under the barrel's balance point on both weapons to take their substantial weight. As long as Morno and Meade could stand there with their earpieces plugged into the noise amplifier that fed into the simple rubberized plastic listening tube connected to the inert membrane that capped the tube in this room, they could track their targeted security guard for elimination if something went wrong. Their crossing fire would X across the middle of the hall and drop the opposite guard, so the projectile didn't by chance hit Casimir in the background. If something in the meeting failed or showed as dangerous, they would instantly drop both guards. He'd see the penetrators rip into the apartment, and he would hit the floor. By the time he hit the floor, Morno and Meade would have shifted targets, and then both brothers would be put down too. It was a simple and secure plan that left a lot of room for improvisation as needed. Stupid Stuart opened his mouth to speak, and as soon as Casimir heard the syllable, Cas, he cut off the speaker with a violent cutting motion. He threatened, "Don't you dare utter another letter, you incompetent worm." His voice was harshly modulated to nearly unrecognizable by the metal and restricted mouth hole. "You know very well for our purposes I am Christos. As you two undoubtedly wish to restrict your own identities, we shall all forsake name-calling." Lennox chastened his younger brother. "How can you be so stupid? You knew full well who was calling this meeting when he signed the couriered message with only an account number." Casimir rolled his eyes at the abject stupidity berating the stupidity. He snapped, "Both of you shut your noise holes before you make things worse. I don't know which of you is stupider. Is it the one who fails to grasp anonymous discretion, or the one who puffs his chest out in an effort to look the bigger man and babbles security procedures for all the walls to hear? Both of you are inordinately stupid, and were it not for your father's money that I so graciously arranged for the two of you to stumble into early, you'd both be little more than middle managers on some second-rate world. So quit your prattling and get ready to take note of my instructions." Without waiting for either to prepare pen and paper, he had strictly forbidden comm units to be brought by themselves or any of their security personnel. Given the stupidity he'd seen so far, he was glad he did, or they would have said something really stupid and drawn hegemony intelligence to their meeting. He began issuing his orders. "This is what I want. Over the next few weeks, secure couriers will arrive at your offices carrying large denomination coins marked with the account number that called this meeting. You will convert them to put options, shorts, and everything else you can think of that will profit from the depression of the Kronos generation holding share price." Lennox scratched his head, politely keeping his mouth shut. His younger brother, with the unsecured brain-mouth switch, babbled, I checked the CGH price this morning as part of my normal portfolio work. They are on every smart money's buy list right now. Their price is so depressed because of the economic slowdown situation in the city, security and succession concerns, along with this infernal blockade that is ruining commerce for this world, that their share prices are literally so low that you can buy 100 credits worth of annual cash flow and assets for only 90 credits worth of investment. Historically, on our exchanges, secured utilities like that with massive capital assets and substantial longevity sell for between 5 and 7 years of cash flow on average. Do you actually think their price will go down farther? Casimir snapped. Do us all a favor. Stop thinking. Close your mouth and do as I tell you. Stuart rolled his eyes at the summary rejection of his cautionary advice. Lennox poured his own derision on top of Stuart. Seriously? You have to be the stupidest thing on the planet. If the price is already depressed, people will be selling all of their puts and shorts at bargain discounts because they will all be seeing nothing but an upward climb for CGH from here. No one will be putting money into securities instruments that profit from CGH, price losing more money. The frustrated Stuart finally said something intelligent. Fine. He looked at Casimir. You have something planned. Sound financial advice is to invest long-term in CGH, holdings at this price. I will continue to advise our clients that they should invest there. That will clear out some of the downside players and open more room for you to invest in the prospect of the falling price. That will also ensure we appear legitimately surprised when whatever surprise you're working on comes to pass. That will expand your margin and will insulate our brokerage's reputation. Lennox castigated, The hell with you. I'm going to add some of my pot to this prediction. If our client says this will happen, I will not bet against his instincts. Stuart shrugged. I'm not saying I won't chase his investment too. I'm just telling you we need to maintain the appearance of impartiality with our general clientele. Casimir warned, Don't you dare. If you two parasites flood the market and crowd me out, I swear to you that you two will have a long and public discussion about how your family fortune came to rest in your hands with more vid journalists than you can ever bother to count. He was obviously referring to the disabled air truck that had slammed into the side of their father's long, sleek black air car at excessive speeds, shearing the smaller vehicle in half before crashing itself. The collision was perfectly placed and spilled the passengers, mother and father, into traffic and the hundreds of meters to the ground along with the remains of both vehicles. It was a brilliant piece of vid, even better than the one used on the news spread the day of the crash. Casimir breathed smoothly to calm himself. I have billions of credits to invest over the next few weeks as I shuffle things around, and for all my troubles, I expect the prices to be not only reasonable but generous in my favor. I want at least a few $100 million put options and shorts at 2.5 credits below the current share price of 57. Lennox shrugged as all patently unconcerned financiers had mastered throughout history when talking about numbers that had more zeros than he had fingers. He reasoned, sounding almost bored. A 5% drop on that share value would be reasonably easy to cover with puts in the half to 1.5 credit range per option. That means you'd need to cover the cost of the options with coins. Then to make any money on the spread, you'd need to see the share price drop below 54.5 minus the cost of the put options. Furious with the assumption of his ignorance, Casimir snapped. Of course I know that, you doddering moron. The amount of money I'm paying you two infectious parasites in commission, damn, well, better get me the best price on those options too. The price will go well below 50, but that's no concern to either of you. You two will both have your expenses and commissions paid in gold coin before that ever comes to pass. Now shut your mouths and do it. Get out of my sight before I have yourselves and your mercenaries killed because you're irritating me.
Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate your listening. When you get a chance, please come and hit the like, subscribe, leave a comment, and check out the book for real down in the description.